We do have a panel of nicely seasoned energy market participants. That's a kind way of saying that we've been around for a while. So today on the call we have Cameron Brooks, who is the president at Tolerable Planet Enterprises, Kelly Kuehn, who is the Senior Products and Services Manager at Duke Energy, and Chris Black, who has joined the call graciously because Marie Ball is quite ill with the flu. And Chris is the Chief Operating Officer at Tendril. Do we have, looks like we've got some slides now. Anyway, our goal today is not just to have these people who have joined us, who are real stakeholders in the industry, show us their slides, but we actually want to be able to discuss with them directly about how we're sorting out the challenges and the opportunities in the industry right now. So I would encourage you to please post your questions as we go along, and I may actually not be able to see them directly because of how we've had to sort of go to plan B on the desktop. So you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my email and just have you guys email me the questions directly that you might have. And so my email is cstimmel, C as in Carol, S as in Sam, T as in Tango, I as in India, M as in Mike, M as in Mike, E as in Echo, and L as in Lima. So cstimmel@manifestmind.com. So go ahead and shoot those through there. So we'll just figure out a way to make this work. So at the end of the hour, you should have a really good idea about a couple of things. Our goal is to introduce and carry further the idea of energy services and how they're really fundamental to building customer-centric utilities, or the utility of the future. We also wanted to bring in New York REV, because we really feel like this is an obvious signpost of what's going to be coming for the utilities. We want to talk about what does this mean and how do we prepare for that. And then, you know, we want to finish off with understanding how do we actually build the connective tissue between utilities and customers. It's probably, you know, it's a little too late for theory, and we need to start moving into action, and that's really what this call is about today. So what I'm going to do is provide a brief overview of our research on the market that Manifest Mind did, and a lot of work from our senior analyst, principal analyst, Brian Jungers. We worked on this together. And then I'm going to have each panelist take just about 5 or 7 minutes to introduce themselves and give us a rundown on their perspective of the utility of the future. After that, we're going to go ahead and jump into those questions. So please do email them. All right, so let's go ahead and, yeah, that's the right side. Thanks, Brad. All right, so 3 big things are happening. When I talked about an inflection point, there are a few things that have really shifted in the market. One, we see this perpetual age of the science experiment on the smart grid and with smart meters. It's drawing to a close. Really is now the time when we need to be looking at how do we establish real credible return on investment for our grid modernization investments. Our customers deserve that. The grid, you know, demands that. So that's where we're going. One of the big pieces of that is the second thing is the penetration of distributed energy resources, so especially rooftop solar in all settings, including residential, commercial, industrial, and utility scale. It's dramatically increased in the past few years, and running the grid is getting harder. In fact, I believe in like between 2010 and 11, we actually came close to doubling that, so it's a big deal. And the third is that there's just an overall cultural shift to a service-based economy, not just in energy at all. Think about, you know, the phone you carry around in your hand or the way you interact with all kinds of service providers. In fact, the reason I'm moderating today is because Manifest Mind, when we formed, one of the things we really wanted to talk about and get a conversation going on was the energy services management market. So we've actually done a forecast, the first forecast on this market, and we've also followed it up just in the past 2 weeks with a fundamental recast of the home energy management market, which has been very device-focused, and we wanted to try to shift that perspective and start looking at shared value. So what did we really discover when we did these things? We found out that, yeah, the home energy management market never really emerged the way we thought it was going to because we lost sight of the forest for the trees. And fundamentally, one thing was overlooked that was incredibly important, and that's the growing importance of the service component in any product offering. So right on the top of the slide, you know, it says here a definition, which is behooves us all to understand is that the energy services management market, it's really the fundamental enabler. It's providing both customers and energy providers the advantages they both want and need. So they get to deliver coordinated customer-centric services to an entirely new generation of connected devices that we find in our hands and in our homes. So all of a sudden, all the conversations I'm on recently with clients, everybody is all of a sudden an expert on energy. They figure once they get that Nest thermostat on their wall, they get it. But let's not really miss the important point, which is that customers are finally willing to acquire energy services, but they are not looking at what we thought they would be looking at. They're looking at non-traditional vendors. They're looking at non-traditional approaches. So, you know, we've got Google Nest, Apple HomeKit, we've got Verizon, we've got Home Security, we have Comcast, and we've got some big numbers. So let's go ahead and jump to that next slide, Brad, and look at the numbers before we jump into our discussion with the panelists here. So in our market spending forecast, we were pretty conservative, and basically what needs to happen and what we're seeing now is this coalescing of the market. The fragmentation is starting to diminish. So we see a steady acceleration and an annual consumer spend that's going to reach approximately $54.3 billion by 2020. We see a notable uptick in market value beginning in 2016, a lot of acceleration in 2017, and the continuing upward trend. So that's over 100% compounded annual growth rate between 2014 and 2020, and a cumulative value of just under $124 billion. Where is this going to be focused? Energy efficiency, thermal and electric energy storage in the home, demand response programs enablers, and management systems that help operate loads in the home automatically. So we get the advantage of balanced optimization also from the utility side. So we believe strongly at Manifest Mind that the underpinnings of the ESM market are already there. It actually arrived with modernized operations, but it hasn't been well defined, and that's why we're here today. We need to understand what the specific boundaries are that we need to place around the ESM marketplace, and then quickly and collaboratively move forward towards taking advantage of this. So I want to hear what the panelists have to say. So I want to start with Cameron Brooks with Tolerable Planet, who's going to discuss the regulatory support that seems to be emerging for this energy services management approach. So Cameron, you want to jump in here?
Great, yeah, thank you. It's great to be here and to be part of this conversation. And, you know, as Carol sort of highlighted, I think it's highlighting an undeniable trend in the industry, which is the choices that consumers are facing and the options they have, both in technology and in their service expectations, are really changing dramatically, and they're changing the face of the industry. So go ahead to the next slide. Just, you know, very quickly, I lead a research firm that's focused on tracking regulatory activities across the state commission. In particular, we focus on 9 different topic areas that cover a suite of innovative products and services that you can see up on the screen. But they're really a suite of things that occur at the distribution edge or the customer edge of the distribution grid, of the electric grid. So we have a team of researchers who are scanning the public utility websites for new proceedings in these areas, and based largely on the interest of our clients, we then do additional research on specific topics or into specific proceedings. And so that's some of the context of the viewpoint in which a lot of people are interested in the REV proceeding. Go ahead to the next slide. And obviously, we don't have time to get into all the details, but just as kind of a reminder, the REV proceeding, which is the Reforming the Energy Vision, it's an ambitious attempt to re-regulate the electricity system in New York around a distribution-level market model. So as another reminder, New York is the 4th largest electric market in the country, behind California, Texas, and Florida. It's one of 3 states to have a statewide ISO. Some of the customers, as you can see on the chart here, have selected a competitive retail supplier for their electricity, but most remain with the incumbent utility. And it's also notable that New York has 2 large power authorities, LIPA and NYPA, which are certainly a factor, and you know, agencies that are trying to be leveraged in support of these REV goals. Go ahead to the next slide. I think one of the things that, well, two of the things, I suppose, that make the REV proceeding very interesting and relevant to this conversation are some of the core assumptions. So I've pulled something from the staff report that was used to really kick this proceeding off. And there's really two core assumptions that underpin electricity regulation, frankly, across the country, but certainly in New York. The first is that demand is inelastic, that there's really no role for customers to play in supporting grid operations, and that, you know, really we just need to chase after the peak. And I think New York has stepped forward in one of the first instances that I know of on the record where they're challenging that assumption very explicitly and saying we believe that there's a more substantive role for consumers. And the second core assumption is that the economies of scale favor centralized generation and bulk transmission. And what they've called out, you know, this is an example, but it's sort of throughout the whole document, that consumers do face more choices than they've had, that technologies have advanced, and that the impacts of things like disruptive weather and economic events require a very different approach to resiliency and reliability, and they'd like to re-examine how the market is set up in light of, you know, whether these core assumptions are actually true. Go ahead to the next slide. Now, as I mentioned, you know, there's a lot of issues. We don't really have an opportunity, certainly in these opening remarks, to get into, you know, all of the details. But you can see that in many respects there's a connective thread between these, which is, you know, what options do consumers have, whether it's the ownership of things like rooftop solar, whether it's taking advantage of advanced metering data and using some other services that companies might provide. And New York is really trying to understand, you know, how do we bring in more market participation? As I note here, there's quite a healthy spectrum of views about what that should look like in each of these categories. Go ahead to the next slide. But what it highlights for me is that there is going to be an influence from where this proceeding falls out. Now, at this point, we're still waiting for the first kind of major order for track one policy decisions. It's really due out anytime in the next few weeks. And then that will lead to a more substantive rate-making portion of the proceeding. We have at E9 Insight a very specific view of the states in that they're each unique. They're not dominoes in the sense that, you know, once one falls, the rest just follow. So we sometimes use a periodic table which is reflective of this idea that they're unique but can be grouped into families with common characteristics. And what I think this means from an ESM point of view and for this conversation today is that there'll be components that migrate, and how they manifest in other states are going to vary. But there's no doubt that the consumer is changing largely because of some of these macro trends that are outside the scope of sort of normal utility planning in terms of what customer expectations are around what services and how they want to be engaged, and also about technologies that are available. So I think the REV proceeding highlights that going forward, we're going to need a much broader, more integrated perspective, and a perspective that certainly within the context of the normal time frame for regulatory proceedings is moving very, very quickly. So hopefully that just offers a little bit of context. Thanks for the chance to be here, and I really look forward to the discussion.
Hey, Cameron. So thanks a lot for that. Before we jump into Kelly's experience at Duke, I think it might be helpful just for you to briefly let us know, will other states be mirroring these efforts, and are they going to race to adopt similar regulations, or is this becoming, you know, academic? I don't think it is, but I'd like to hear what you have to say on that.
No, I don't think it's academic. On the other hand, I don't think that states are simply going to be rushing to mirror what ultimately comes out of New York. And for reasons that may be specific to New York, some of which were noted on that last slide in terms of what kinds of executive authority the Commission has, how the state market is structured. Many state commissions would not be able to step forward with as bold a proposal as they have put forward in New York without some kind of legislative authority granted to them first. So that's an example where I would just say, no, I don't think there will be a mirroring. But I do think, if you go back one more slide just to answer this question, I do think that there are going to be some components around things like, what does the system look like? How does the system operate at a feeder level? Is a net metering arrangement, for example, for rooftop solar on one circuit different than on another? Or should it be because of the characteristics of how the system operates? I think that level of granularity and transparency, I think that is a trend that we're going to see in other states, and we're seeing it already in states like Hawaii and California. Things like access to customer usage data and how customers can both access their own data but make that available to other service providers for things like disaggregation of their load. You know, we're seeing that already in states like Illinois that have a proceeding underway to establish a good framework for how that should be done. So I think in answer to your question, nothing is going to be picked up whole cloth and brought to another state. But I think states are going to start seeing, 4 or 5 different components related to customer energy usage, system operations, ownership of rooftop solar, and more of a move towards how do we balance the system at a more localized level. I think those are trends that we're going to see, but how they manifest in other states is going to vary. Hopefully it won't be quite a Frankenstein effect where it just goes in 100 different directions, or let's say 51 different directions. But that's how I would expect it to play out.
Okay, actually that really helps. So that on that last slide we were looking at, you were talking about new customer choices. So I want to hear from Kelly Kuehn from Duke, who's going to describe really the remarkable success that Duke Energy has had on their customer engagement projects. And I think depending on how this kind of NYREV influences other activities, regulatory activities around the country, and again, Hawaii is a really interesting example of the challenges here, they're going to have to see what's worked already. And Duke has done an amazing job in stepping out front in this aspect. So Kelly, why don't you tell us what's going on at Duke?
Thanks, Carol. Yeah, this is Kelly Kuehn, and I'm a senior program manager at Duke. I've been with Duke for about 10 years, which makes me a baby. If you guys are in the utility world, you know, most people have been there 30. But been there long enough to see some good changes going on, and I'm in the behavioral modification group. So, Carol, we can go to the next slide, or Chris, or whoever. So basically when I joined Duke, and for a while thereafter, basically customers were seen as meters or ratepayers or someone that we had to serve, and the focus was on keeping the cost to serve as low as possible. And now we're really seeing the new Duke, and we have a customer officer now, a customer satisfaction officer now. And we're really trying to work with customers and empower them to take control of their energy by providing them information and services. And with doing that and starting a dialogue with customers, we're actually earning a place or a seat around their table as their trusted energy advisor. And given all the people who are trying to play in this space, it's important that we get, you know, a solid foundation as the advisor that they turn to first. And you can go to the next slide. And what we've seen is that our customers, they get their bill and they pay their bill. They're not really sure what their bill really means, and they're not really sure what they can do to change their bill. And so we came out with the program, and we can go to the next slide, in partnership with Tendril, of the Home Energy Report, which there are other programs out there similar to this. We did quite a bit of testing internally at Duke, several years of what we wanted to have as a behavioral modification program, and then went commercial in 2012 with Tendril. But basically, we see this as our flagship product with information. This is where we start the conversation with the customer because it's outside of the bill. We do not mail it with the bill. We try to get it there within 2 weeks after they've received their bill. And we've had a lot of success with it, and we've made it very clean and easy to see, to read. It informs customers about their use. It compares them to similar households, and we tell them what those similar households look like, and it motivates them to change. And so, you know, Duke we're in 6 states now, and we have the My Home Energy Report now in all 5 states, and Florida is now having a discussion about introducing it there. But so to date, we're in North Carolina, South Carolina, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, and just recently we were given approval from the Commission to enter into our Duke Energy Progress territory in North and South Carolina, which was a big hurdle to get over, and we're really excited because those reports are rolling out now. So from when we started the program in like mid-2012 to date, we have over 20 million reports that have been sent to customers. And that at the time was 1.2 million customers. Now with the addition of the Legacy Progress customers, we are closer to 2 million customers. It's the largest program in North America, and if not, I think in the world. But one of the things that we do is we also try to, you know, we're sending out these paper reports. Customers are saying, why do you have to send me paper? And basically that's what we're approved to do, and that's what we know works right now. But we plant trees through leaf relief, I believe is what it's called. And Chris, you can jump in here, but I said it wrong. But basically, Tendril has this agreement with this company that for every piece of paper that we send out, there's a certain amount that adds up. And so based on sending out those 20 million reports and welcome letters, we've planted over 5,400 trees to try to cover what we've taken from the forest. But what's even more important is the KWH that we've saved. We've saved enough power to run 44,000 homes for 1 year. And, you know, customers see it, the report, and they can see how their usage is changing. But what they don't see, and we try to communicate with them, is the whole community effect of what can happen if everybody just does a little bit. One of the other benefits, and it honestly is a side benefit to the report, is we promote other programs that the customers can take advantage of to help them reduce their energy, and we produced over 30,000 sales and other programs just from it being featured in the Home Energy Report. And then I get a lot of letters, we get emails, we get phone calls from customers, and they thank us, and they tell us the conversations that they're having around the table now, or they say, thanks, I need to show this to my kids so I could show them to turn out the lights, et cetera. And I like to talk about the marriage that we saved. We had a customer who had unfortunately thrown away their latest My Home Energy Report, and they were in the process of selling their home. And many people use this report to show that, hey, my house is efficient, and even Duke Energy says so. So he had thrown out the report, and his wife was going to put it in the literature for their real estate packet, and she was livid. And so he called us and asked us if we could send him another copy, and we did. So we saved his marriage for that period of time. I don't know what's happened since. But and just to point out, we do this program. We don't do it as something that we're required to meet requirements. We do this as a revenue generation for the company. So we get compensated for the KWH that we do save, and we get compensated for the lost revenue. So we're not doing this just because someone has told us to. We actually see this as something that is a big business for Duke, as well as it is a way to get customers engaged with Duke and keep them engaged with Duke, and taking advantage of other Duke Energy programs. So you can go to the next slide. So what's next, and this is literally like next week, we have been testing our MRE Interactive, which is the portal for the My Home Energy Report program, and it'll be on the portal and it'll be mobile. And I don't even, sometimes people call it the, MyHer Online, and it is not that. It is not the report online. As a matter of fact, I don't even think we have a PDF of the report online through the portal. Basically, this is giving customers the same information about their comparisons, but it's giving them the opportunity to set goals and give them ideas of how to meet those goals. And so they can choose actions. If they set a goal of saving 10%, then there'll be a bunch of actions that come up that they can choose to meet that 10%. And if they don't choose enough, it will tell them you don't have enough to get to your 10% savings. But it'll also allow them to see what other customers are doing. They can actually post ideas that they've done. They can ask an expert questions. And of course, they can track their progress to date on how they're doing on their goals. So it's so much more. And in this portal, we're actually able to do what we can't do on the paper report today, and that's disaggregate their usage. So we're able to show them on a monthly basis as well as an annual basis where they're using the most energy, so that they can then go to those areas of tips to find ways to reduce in those areas that they're spending the most. So we've gone through internal kind of friends and family testing, and everything's gone great. And we are getting ready to do an external friends and family testing with a rollout by March 1st to those customers who are paper customers. So you have to be a MyHer paper customer in order to be able to be eligible for the portal. And we can go to the next slide. And then another thing that we're doing in my group is our home energy management system. And this is currently just in Ohio, but and we just kicked it off several months ago, and we have almost 1,400 customers signed up. And as most of you who have tried this, it's not an easy concept to share and sell. So we're happy with the number of people we've gotten online to do this program so far. And this is where we give them a smart thermostat, and they can control their thermostat. They can participate and actually be compensated for participating in DR events. And again, this is just to get the customer engaged with their energy usage, get them excited about it. One of the things is if a customer is in our home energy manager program, that's like they've graduated to, so they are no longer in our My Home Energy Report program. And this also is through a portal and through mobile. And we can go, I think that's my last slide. And that's it. So, I mean, we've got a lot going on with the expansion of the paper program and then the introduction of the MyHer Interactive. We have a very low opt-out rate, less than 0.1%. 2% of our customers contact us about the program, and we actually see that as success because that means that the report is that self-explanatory that they can read it and understand it. The majority of the calls that we do receive are to just correct their premise information because if we didn't have it through a survey that they had responded to Duke, then we get it through Experian or other sources, and sometimes that could be inaccurate, so they call to change their information. So customers are loving it. We've done EM&V in all 5 states. We haven't done it in Duke Energy Progress, obviously, because we aren't there yet, or we're just getting there. And their satisfaction with the program, across the board is a 9 out of 10. So we're real excited to see how they're accepting this program and getting involved. And they even will, tweet their report or post it on their Facebook. And we even had a child use it as a science experiment. He used one of the tips where we said to turn off the oven early so that, and then things will continue to cook. And so he did that as his science project, and it turns out that works better for flatter things like cookies than it does for muffins. But, he tweeted his, whole presentation board, et cetera. He got a very high grade on it. So I'm loving how much customers are getting involved and also sharing with us how they're using the report. I think that's all
Kelly,
I have.
thank you. Thank you so much. Actually, you kind of read my mind. I was just going to ask you a question about, what kind of further engagement you're seeing. Have you seen any kind of viral nature to this? And it sounds like you are. And I do want to pass this off to Chris at Tendril, because you kind of set us up a little bit there to talk about what Tendril is doing really to provide, for lack of a better term, really that connective tissue between where we want to go and how we're starting to get there. So Chris, if you want to go ahead and talk about that a little, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah,
Hey,
absolutely.
Chris.
Thanks, Carol. Yep.
Chris, I was just going to add to Carol your question. One of the things that is a telltale sign of how this program is being received is we have customers calling to opt in. Customers are talking to their neighbors. They're like, I'm not getting that, and it's because they're typically in our control group. So we actually have customers calling us and asking to get in the program. So that adds to the whole.
That's new and different for a utility call center. So that's great. That's great. All right, Chris, jump on here and tell us how you're making this work.
Sure, yeah, thanks everyone who has come before me. Kelly, thank you. I think that sets us up well with everything that Duke is doing, and I'll talk a little bit more about how Duke plays in and kind of really leading this transformation here in the industry. I think, though, that I'd like to give Kelly a quick shout-out. Everyone expected to participate in this webinar and learn a little bit about the transition that's happening in the industry. I bet no one expected to learn better ways of baking cookies. So thank you, Kelly. I think invaluable, certainly for me. So maybe we can jump to the next slide. So we've been talking about this transition that is coming for a long time, but I think we're now finally there. Nothing about the way that energy companies have operated for the last 40 years are going to predict anything about how they operate in the next 10. For a long time, we talked about how there's this kind of 80-20 in the industry, where 20% of the industry was really kind of forward-thinking and looking towards proactively embracing the change, and 80% were either ignoring it or pretending it wasn't happening or waiting to see, and let the brave souls go forward first. I think that has almost changed and flipped overnight, whereas there's very few folks that you talk to in the industry that don't see the change that is coming in towards this energy services management transformation and aren't actively pursuing it and figuring out how to do that well. So, I think that was the uphill battle for a long time, was getting people having the same conversation, but that conversation now is being had all over the world, and so that's no longer the challenge. The challenge now is okay, now what do we do about it? How do we help utilities and energy providers really embrace that and become those energy services management providers? And, I think that there's a large hunger for it. There's a large appetite for it. When you look at the type of consumers that are consuming energy today, more and more they're the iPad generation that expect more than just electrons. And so part of what you saw earlier, where consumers were thought of as ratepayers, and the product that was sold was a commodity electron, and now consumers are thought of as consumers and customers, and the products and services that these utilities and energy providers are providing are products and services, and a large, healthy portfolio of them, because they really are embracing that change. The next slide. So, I think that having that conversation, get everyone on the same page as far as that change that's coming, getting them to embrace it is one thing, but once that has happened, then what? I think there are a lot of requirements that need to be satisfied in order to really be an energy services management provider, because saying that it was one thing, doing it is another thing. Some of the portfolio that Kelly walked you through is a good example of someone who's kind of walking the walk there, and that's a difficult problem. There's a lot of new challenges that utilities honestly haven't had to face before in order to satisfy that. For example, I think utilities have done a good job of segmenting customers and talking about customers in large groups, but we really need to take that forward. We need to take that down to kind of a consumer level, household level, and really understand how to have that conversation in a way that resonates with that household. In order to do that, there are all sorts of challenges that have to be satisfied. Scale is certainly one of them. Talking about people in a high-level segmentation exercise where there's 6 or 8 segments is one thing. Talking about 2.1 million households, like in the Duke territory, as 2.1 million individual unique households is a whole different problem. So scale is certainly one of those challenges, but scale in and of itself isn't hard unless you add the other 2 bits in there, which is how do you understand what is happening in the home and kind of how the home consumes energy in order to have that really personalized conversation. And so that's really those next 2 buckets. bringing the behavioral science and the building science so that you really understand at a household level how to have that dialogue in a way that's going to resonate with them and fulfill that kind of end-to-end communication. Next slide. So we think about this as kind of a three-step journey, and it's kind of know, act, measure. So in order to get people to interact, and whether that be really digesting the information on the paper report or really interacting and sharing and having some of that information go viral on some of those other outreach channels, or even more so, participating in a control program like the thermostat program that Kelly was showing. It really requires educating and earning trust. Trust is not something that utilities have been known for in past years, but I think it's the thing that is changing the most quickly. And I think if you look at some of the things that the more progressive utilities are doing of really educating and not for necessarily end dollar reasons, but for purely customer satisfaction reasons, that they're really starting to provide the tools and the outreach and the channels to allow those personalized communications to end users to understand how they're using energy in their homes, how they can make a difference, and how they can kind of change behavior in order to affect their pocketbook and kind of how they interact with the environment around them. So that's really what that know first step is leveraging kind of those behavioral techniques and the low-level premise-level understanding of how energy is consumed in the home in order to make then very targeted recommendations for that home and the people in it. And then act is, okay, now that you have that information, we're presenting it to you in a way that is personal and relevant to you, not you as a member of a large segment, but you as an individual. What do you do about it? And so giving them those actionable recommendations that they can understand in context, not a kilowatt hour necessarily, but an action that's going to lead to a result that they can see and touch and really understand. And then once you've done that well, and you've earned their trust along the way, and you've earned their engagement, then you can start taking the next steps of engaging with them more directly, but making sure that you're really tracking that all the way along, showing it in an ROI and easily understood way, and ensuring that the entire system is getting smarter and smarter along the way. Next slide. So by doing that, taking that approach, and we started this in my section here saying that shift is changing where consumers expect more than just electrons, and in order to do that, you have to really talk to them as individuals, not just segments, and certainly not as a large body, 2 million people that are marketed to and talked to in all the same way. So we really think about this as putting the customer in the center of everything, and not just a segment of a customer, but each individual customer, so that every interaction is given to them in personalized and meaningful ways, so that they resonate and they engage further. And that's really the fundamental heart of what ESM is. It's putting the customer in the center, and then tailoring your communications and your channels and all of your outreach to that individual. Next slide. So this is a very high-level look at how we think about this. So an energy services management platform has to consume a lot of data across a lot of channels. The utility is certainly one of those channels. The top three usually come from the utility. The utility has terabytes and terabytes of data and historical data on their users. So we can take that, augment that with other data, third-party data, demographic data, weather data, even user-generated content, tie all that together to make an actionable corpus of data that can really drive insights. All of that then flows into a platform. That bit on the right there is supposed to represent the Tendril cloud, but someone just pointed out to me that it looks like a cupcake, and now I can only see it as a cupcake. All of that data now flows into the cloud and allows you to really do interesting things on top of it. You can really understand, provide low-level insights and analytics on top of that, use that to drive personalized engagements by multi-channel with those customers to create that personalized and relevant experience for every individual on top of the platform. Next slide. Oh, that's it.
Hey, thanks,
and that's
Chris.
it for me.
Yep. All right, we just have about 13 minutes left here to get some of the questions answered. I have gotten questions in my inbox. Brad, since I think you're seeing the desktop, I don't know if you've also gotten questions through chat, if some people logged on late and didn't realize we were going to have some of these technical challenges. But there have been an interesting number of questions really related to the financial nuts and bolts piece of this. So I want to pitch a question to Cameron. So Cameron, what changes do you think are needed from a regulatory perspective to the cost of service paradigm that's going to allow revenue generation through new services?
Well, look, if I had the simple exact answer to that, you know, then that'd certainly be.
You wouldn't be on this call, would you? Right.
I might not be on this call. I mean, but which is simply to say it's obviously a very complicated area with a lot of overlapping kinds of regulations that aren't easy to untangle. So I kind of have two answers. I mean, one is I think we need to be moving away from cost of service models towards things like performance-based rate making when it comes to things like services. You know, in my opinion, cost of service regulation makes sense for investments in infrastructure, and in particular in infrastructure that doesn't get depleted. So think of things like pipelines or railroad tracks or distribution wires. I mean, obviously there's a life cycle to those and they need to be replaced, but it's not usually the result of exactly how many trains rolled across the track or how many electrons were moved. Now, moving away from a cost of service model to performance-based rate making isn't necessarily simple, and there's no one answer to that. That is to say, you can have some incentives built in or shared saving mechanisms. I'm sure Kelly could describe, you know, their experience with some of those that introduce an element of performance-based rate making, but it's not quite at the level that, you know, some might espouse, like a true, if you hit this performance target, then you get a certain return that's completely uncoupled from what the actual costs were. So, I mean, those are some maybe a couple answers to your question, Carol. And I would say more broadly, and this goes back to the macro trend we discussed at the beginning. You know, there are some forces at play that give consumers more choices, and choices that the regulatory process hasn't really considered as quote unquote competition to electric regulation. And I think that you know, one of the first things that regulators and policy can do is to help recognize that there is competition in the system, whether it's from these outside forces or whether it's baked into the market design so that, you know, other companies can come in. And so I think embracing that and figuring out the best ways to allow more competitive forces into the industry is probably a good thing. Okay,
awesome. So I do have access to the chat questions now as well. But so Kelly, looks like we have a question regarding pushback from members regarding the use of smart meters, which is interesting because as you were talking, I was thinking about the privacy issue too. But I kind of want to reframe that question and just ask you, in general, with that in mind, if you could give one piece of practical advice to your fellow utility representatives who are dealing with their consumers in this domain and all these kinds of concerns like EMF claims and other privacy issues, which are quite valid. What is the advice that you would give to engaging your customers and just kind of dealing with this whole sort of difficult and new area for us?
Well, I mean, one of the things we do is just communicate. So when people start the My Home Energy Report program, it comes with a welcome letter, and we explain what we're doing and where the information comes from and what's not being shared. We also have that FAQs so that customers can know. And I mean, we have had customers saying, I want to know exactly who you're comparing me to, and we tell them, you know, that's a privacy breach, and that's not something we're allowed to share. And, you know, they assume that it may be just their neighbors, and we assure them that, you know, they're being compared to similar homes in their area, and that's how we say it. We don't even say being compared to your neighbors, because we don't want them thinking that they're being compared to the Smiths, because the Smiths have a smaller house or whatever. But we really just try to communicate with them that we're not sharing their data with anybody, and it's all just done at, you know, a level where it's brought together as opposed to being individualized. But also, just to answer the question, we haven't had that much pushback on the smart meters. Now, in the Southeast, we had just put in a bunch of new AMI meters, so we don't have that many smart meters in the Southeast, although we do in the Midwest. And there has been some pushback, and I know that there are situations where we've had to go take them out, but for the most part, once we explain them well, and I don't think that we did a good job of that when we first rolled them out, and we learned that we needed to explain better what was going on and how the customer was going to benefit, then we didn't get as much pushback. So, I mean, it's really, to me, all about communicating and, you know, giving customers credit. And I'll give an example. We in the report, we used to compare dollars. You know, so we'd say this is how much you spent versus the average home versus the efficient. And we were doing that based on a rate factor. And the customers would compare it to their bills, which we never thought they'd do. And it didn't match up because they were paying tariffs or they had another service that was on their bills. So we decided that we were going to switch to comparing KWH. And we hadn't started with comparing KWH because we thought, oh, customers don't know what that means. You know, we need to have it in some kind of measurement that they know what that means. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to have to do a lot of communication. So I pulled together some focus groups and asked customers, how do we describe what we're about to do? And they told us, don't. They said, you don't need to make a big deal out of this. We're looking just to see how we look comparative. We're not, you know, one customer even said, you don't have to put any numbers in the houses. So it's really communicating with the customers and asking your customers is what we found the best way to have a successful program.
You know, one thing I'd add on to that, add on to Kelly's response there is everything that Kelly showed in her slides, the reports and the portal, none of that requires smart meters. And so there's a lot you can do without smart meters. I totally get that there is pushback. I think it's a minority and more concentrated in certain areas, but there's there's a lot you can do without it as well. That still goes to that engagement and personalized communication point.
Yes, and Chris, actually, that leads into the question I wanted to ask you after Kelly. Kelly's really helped us get a handle on the behavioral energy efficiency piece and kind of talking about the fact that it's, we don't really need to dig into these technical details. It's not, in some ways, it's a distraction, but there have been a lot of recent bylines from Tendril that said, hey, we need to actually start looking beyond behavioral energy efficiency as well. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean here and how this contributes to our overall realization of customer centricity? And just quick time check, we have about 4.5 minutes left.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I think energy efficiency is one means to an end, but I think the end ultimately is customer satisfaction and, bringing the customers along on that that engagement journey, because as they expect more from the utilities have to be able to provide more in different services. And so I think, the actual ultimate goal is that kind of communication and outreach that Kelly was talking about, and doing it in a way that resonates within each individual, because at the end of the day, that leads to greater customer satisfaction. Customer satisfaction leads to greater participation. Greater participation, creates things like EE, but EE isn't necessarily the ultimate means to the end. So I think, thinking about the customer in the middle and thinking about them as customers and really trying to orient all of the programs around customer satisfaction are going to allow you to achieve your goals, whether they be EE goals or increased product and service revenue created through those channels, as Duke is doing. All of those will be accomplished, and even better if you think about it as customer sat first.
Okay, all right, that's interesting. I actually also got a couple of questions here in my inbox asking about some details about our study and our estimate of annual consumer spend. So there are a lot of things that are going into our belief that this market is really, really robust, and it goes beyond the management systems. It's also looking at the portion of spend for energy efficiency, thermal and electric energy storage in the home, demand response program enablers, and so that paper is actually available at Tendril. You can download it for free off the Tendril website if you want the details on that, and it's a pretty good read, if I could say so, if you like to read 20 pages on you know, how forecast is done. But it's actually it's a good study. So I would encourage you to go out to the Tendril website. If you can't find it easily, let me or Brad Langley know, and we'll make sure you get a copy of that. And I do have your email in my inbox now, too, as well. So we'll make sure that's taken care of. Just in our last 2 minutes, I wanted to make sure that we actually got where we needed to get. So we wanted to discuss how energy services are really fundamental to the customer-centric utility, and I think we've gotten to that. Cameron also helped us understand how New York Rev, while maybe is not going to be mirrored across the industry, it's really a very unique and interesting signpost of what's coming for utilities, and really, you know, how the regulatory approach to this market is changing dramatically. And then Chris talked about how we build that connective tissue between the utilities and the consumer. So I think we got what we need, and I'm going to do a quick check and see if we have any other questions. No? I do know that Amber is going to share a couple of things, just some housekeeping issues here to wrap us up, but I do believe we will have a recording available for playback later this afternoon if you want to share it. It will be on the website. I want to thank all of our awesome panelists for sharing what they have with us on energy services management, and all of you for attending and sticking around. So thanks so much, and I'm going to pass it back to our hosts.
Well, thank you, Carol. And yes, you're correct. The program is recorded and will be available later. And we also want to remind attendees that CS Week and Conference 39 will be held from April 27th through May 1st this year at the Charlotte Convention Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. Registration is open. So we look forward to seeing everyone. And we wanted to say thank you to the presenters today. This is a very informative presentation, and a lot of information shared. So we want to thank you for that. And with that, thank you, attendees. We will conclude the webinar.